Good morning. Today's reading is taken from 1 Chronicles 16, verses 23 to 31, and I'm reading from the New International Version. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Proclaim his salvation day after day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. For great is the Lord, and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and joy are in his dwelling place. Ascribe to the Lord, all you families of nations. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come before him. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. Let the heavens rejoice. Let the earth be glad. Let them say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Thanks be to God for his holy word. Amen.
Greetings, Somerset West United Church. Congratulations on your anniversary. As I remember Somerset West United Church, I remember the people. I remember on the church council working with people like Peter Swanepoel and Louis de Beer and also Wendy Lowe and others. I remember the leaders that were involved in youth and children's ministry, and Gigi and Colleen Barata, and also John Bullivant, Annery MacDonald, Esme Pywell, Lester Pywell also involved. And then I remember the young people when I arrived: Genevieve Duprier, Lo Nell, Bronwyn Hamilton, and many others. And then later on, Menzo Barish and Neil Render, and then later on still Lizzie Fick and Robin Heman and others. One of the other things I remember is the enormous amount of camps that I went to when I was at Somerset West United Church. We had camps at Wortelgat, we had camps at Labrie in Franschhoek, we had camps, took groups to Baptist Summer Camp near Kimberley. We took groups to New Song Festival in Hartenbos. And those were special times spent with the young people of the congregation, and times that I really have valued. So that's all from me. Have a wonderful anniversary, and hope you guys have a lovely celebration.
Hello, Somerset West United. It's Gabby here. Happy birthday to my beautiful church family. I am so excited to be able to share a message with you, some memories of a very, very special time at a very, very special church. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gabby Williams. I was the youth and children's pastor at Somerset West United for a full decade between 2007 and 2017. And what an incredible decade that was. There is so much to be thankful for the beautiful congregation that you are. And God has done some really special things over that time. I'd like to start maybe just talking about some of the wonderful events that come to mind quite easily. The first being the country fair. Year after year, everybody either gathering at Southey's Vines or on the church property itself to raise funds for the community, our church building. When we eventually went from the old church to the new church, everybody gets involved with this country fair, which was awesome. We also, through some pretty cool fundraisers over those years, the Generations concert comes to mind, with the multi-talented congregation members all sharing their various talents with us. We had a wonderful Greek evening. We had a 1920s themed dinner dance, which was great fun. And we also, of course, used to have our VIP teas. I hope those are still going. That was always a wonderful occasion to celebrate our senior members in the church congregation. And speaking of senior church congregation members, some really special people stand out in my mind from that decade. People like Marge and Vera and Isabel. And then to kind of narrow it down back to, the ministry that I was so blessed to be a part of, such an honor and a privilege. I didn't, when you find a job you love, you never work a day in your life. That's how I felt about being a youth and children's pastor. I just had such a wonderful time. I worked throughout the week, but predominantly we had Wednesday night Bible studies. We had a vibrant Friday night youth group, Sunday morning church, sometimes Sunday evening church, and just, serving the youth of Helderberg and connecting with other youth groups and across ministries was just such a wonderful joy. We had 10 years of camps and holiday clubs and Christmas services and Easter services and Passover services. And the youth was just so impactful, wanting to, give back to their communities. So many of the kids who came through the youth became youth leaders when they were young adults, and so fed back into the ministry that they grew up in themselves. It's always wonderful when you see the journey, when you get to have been part of a journey for so long, for 10 years, and you get to see people go older and feed back into the ministry. So our youth ministry was full of fantastic people. From our leaders, we think of people who are no longer with us, like George Strachen, who gave so much of his heart to the youth. And we also think of leaders now who are still at United. Johan, how's it, Johan? People who gave of themselves so much. I think of our kids ministry, used to be Promised Land, now Kids Zone, and the wonderful people who gave so much of themselves as well to Sunday mornings and Friday afternoons. Some of the leaders who stick out in my memory would be the Cowie twins, for those of you who remember them, Gigi Steenkamp, Taryn Rose Innes, Linda Parker. I don't want to mention everybody because I'm bound to forget somebody, which I'm sorry but I love and remember you all. And just the wonderful work that you did and continue to do in the lives of the young people at Somerset West United Church. Thank you for all you did for them then. So the fact that we're celebrating 97 years as a congregation, that is an impressive milestone. And it was God's pure blessing on my life that I got to share 10 years of that with you. And you will always be my church family. I adore all of you. It'll always be home coming through those doors when I come there now with my family. And I wish you the happiest of birthdays. May God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and bring you peace. All of my love. Bye.
How do you condense 20 years of ministry in a congregation like this into a few minutes without leaving out somebody and leaving out a lot of what happened? And so you'll forgive me if I ramble a little bit, but I made a few notes to tell you the story. We got here in 1987, the beginning of January, the middle of January, and we were faced with a congregation that was in deep mourning. Their previous minister, who had been a wonderful man, a man by the name of Ray Rose, and he and Sheila, and they lived in the manse where the butchery is now. They had no children. They'd been here for 11 years. He was a wonderful pastor, and he died very suddenly after a morning service in April. So when the congregation arrived in the evening, the moderator was there, and their minister had died. And one of the problems was that the elderly folk in the congregation had told Ray what to do at their funeral. And Ray had a prodigious memory, but he hadn't written anything down. So when we got here, I had a funeral of a young man in the congregation who'd been killed in a motor accident at the age of 21, the day before I was inducted, and the church was packed. It was small. It was only what we know as the hall today, but that and what is now kids zone were packed to the gills, because this young man had made a huge impact on the congregation. But at that service, evidently I got it right, because people thought, okay, Mr. Rose isn't around anymore, but this new young chap seems to know what he's doing. And so we had a string of funerals in the first couple of months that I was here. Elderly folk who realized now is the time to let go. And that's the reality of death. Sometimes we hold on until we feel we're comfortable to go. And it's a remarkable thing, but one comes up against it every time, and very often in one's ministry, and one needs to live with it. Anyway, so there it was. And I inherited David Gray. Poor David didn't know me. I knew of him, but we worked well together, and David was an absolute champion during that time. He helped me a lot. But he only lasted a year, and then he moved on and took a call to Curls River. And then I was joined by a young man, Richard Mabry, wonderfully gifted young man, very, very good preacher. But a man who was restless and found it difficult to settle into a situation, and under the authority of a senior man. I think that needs to be said. He went off and had a very successful ministry. Unfortunately, he found the structures of the denomination too inhibiting, and moved off into more relaxed structures. But wherever he went, he had a lovely ministry, and unfortunately he died of cerebral malaria, which he picked up in Uganda, where he'd started some work. By that time, this congregation had grown considerably, because there was a huge influx of people from Transkei and the Eastern Cape, but also from the southern suburbs of Cape Town, where people discovered that they could get to the CBD more quickly from Somerset West and this area than they could from the southern suburbs. There was also a growing drug problem in the schools in the southern suburbs, and so they thought if they brought their kids out of that environment, it would be better. Well, they just brought the problem with them. So we sat with a huge challenge. But whatever happened, we had this huge influx of people. And I said to the leadership of the church that I needed to terminate my role as a supervisor of newly ordained ministers or ministers on probation. And we needed to have somebody who knew about pastoral ministry, someone who could care for this congregation, because it had just outgrown our resources. And we called a man by the name of Des Kleinig. He was a pastor of all pastors. And he and Pam came to the congregation. He had about 5 years to retire. And during that time that he was with us, Des and Pam, very often with him, visited every single visiting point in this congregation. And he set up caring structures that in many ways have been the foundation of the way in which this congregation cares for its people today. Those same structures have stood. And then he was followed by Tim Hawkridge, who came as my colleague. Des's official designation was pastoral assistant, but Tim came as my colleague, and when I retired, he carried on, and we were invited by the church council and Tim to stay on, because there's an unwritten courtesy that if you retire, you move away, so that whoever follows you doesn't feel that the previous person is breathing down their neck. we stayed on, but I'm not going to cover that area. But I've worked with the most wonderful people, and I want to stick with the folk who were on the staff with me. They developed a very, very vibrant youth dimension to youth and children's ministry. My two daughters were involved in that, and George Marcinkowski was part of the Presbytery movement, and a young man by the name of Neil Mayer, who had grown up in this congregation, and he moved off and was called to the ministry, and in fact he and George ended up at their theological training together at Rhodes University in Grahamstown. And he's now a minister in Scotland and doing very well for himself. And then we called, at around about that time, when Neil left, we called Brendan Ash to oversee the youth work. And that was a whole new ball game. And Brendan brought a whole new dimension of ministry to the team that consisted of he and myself and wonderful days. Keeping the wheels rolling in the office, I came here and Ina Mace was here, a lovely lady who had been employed by Ray Rose before me. And she and I got on extremely well, and we both of us weathered this new congregation together and the new things that were happening. And when Ina laid down the traces, we employed a lady who had been trained by Father General Peterson down the road at St. Paul's Catholic Church. And Carol Burkett was a marvelous asset. For a number of years, she was the one in the powerhouse behind the daily running of the congregation. People loved her, she loved them. And it was in the early days of computers, and she wouldn't let the computer get. I'd hear her mumbling in the office, and I'd say, "Have you got a problem?" She said, "It's only a computer." Well, Mari Smith, lovely lady. She came in 3 days a week to help cleaning up the complex, and a remarkable woman with a tragic history. As one of her sons had disappeared without trace and was in all the years, and I don't think she's alive anymore, but they've never had any evidence of whether he's alive or dead. He just disappeared. But a most gracious and godly person. And the person who was sort of the general caretaker was a man by Farrington Ngubentombi. Now that's a lovely name. That in Xhosa, it means the maiden's blanket. And Farrington was that kind of person. He was a grandfatherly type. And one can imagine a maiden feeling that he had the warmth and protection of a blanket. Ngubentombi. And when Farrington retired, another young man from the same place in Kumbu in Transkei joined us. Also a member of the Presbyterian Church, with which called the Reformed Presbyterian Church, which was the church that grew up amongst largely the Xhosa-speaking people from the old Church of Scotland missions. So we had this young man, my forgettery is really going well here. Talang Bunyani joined us. Most people knew him as Phineas. When he left here, he started doing garden services, and he's probably one of the better-known gardeners in the Helderberg Basin. Ernest Schwartz followed him. Ernest wasn't with us very long, and I don't think his tenure was a particularly happy one for him. And so he left us, and in fact, he was back on campus here a few days ago. I saw him. He'd come to ask to do something or get some information. It was good to see him. And then, of course, Bethuel Lapalo. And Bethuel, I think, is probably the longest-serving staff member that this church has ever had now. And Bethuel is much loved by us all. And when Bethuel's not here, things fall apart, that's for sure. there were some wonderful events and things that have come out of the life of this church. The establishment of the Elgin United Church was a major one. When I got here, the Elgin folk used to come over the mountain regularly, Sunday by Sunday, and they'd be here for worship. In fact, one of the families who lived out near the Teerwaterskloof Dam, their daughters, for year after year after year, would get the attendance prize at Sunday school in the days when we did those things. And then it seemed to us to be viable to establish a separate congregation in Elgin. And it was wonderful how that all came together. And we felt the draft here, both in terms of membership numbers, but also the financial support in this congregation. But we've weathered that. And well, history kind of has come round again that Kim is... Their minister is now helping on the staff here, and there's this a looser association between the two congregations as they were there. And then the establishment of Masibulele. Now the Masibulele congregation was formed out of a number of small groups of worshippers, some in Luandle in the old hostels, and others on the AECI campus. They were congregations, outstations of the Langra Presbyterian Church, and they were members of this Reformed Presbyterian Church, the daughter church of the Scottish Missions. And they asked to become part of this church once the two denominations had merged in the late 1990s, 1999, I think it was. And we eventually got to forming the Masibulele Church. And Masibulele is a lovely word. Also is Xhosa word. It means come, and it's a community thing. Come, let's give thanks. That's what Masibulele means. Come, let's give thanks. A call to the community to be a community of gratitude. And it's lovely. So that was a great event, you know. And then other impacts in the basement. When I got here, David Gray was deeply involved in setting up what has become the night shelter many years ago, and 37 years ago now. And that was just launching this new venture, and it's gone from success to success. Oh, it's had its challenges and its downtimes, but this church was part of the establishment of the night shelter. Hospice, when I got here, it was a fledgling organization just beginning. Pat Pigeon started it off working out of the boot of her motor car, carrying this new palliative care dimension to the medical profession. And our congregation was deeply involved. And in fact, if you go to the hospice campus on the old Stellenbosch Road, and the little rondavel there, which is the chapel, the stained glass window there is in memory of Ray and Sheila Rose, because in recognition of the congregation's involvement, and I got involved there. And in fact, I'm still a volunteer. I've been a volunteer there since 1987. So this church has a deep imprint there. And then the Street People Centre, Ian Greer, who had a Salvation Army background, came out from the UK. He was there, a little boy in the Blitz. His parents were officers in the Salvation Army, and he tells how he and his dad would go off with food parcels in the carrier, and he sitting on the crossbar with his dad through the Blitz, taking food parcels to people whose homes had been bombed out. So Ian came with that kind of passionate care for the underprivileged, and he was the one who started the Street People Centre in Somerset West with a team from this church and others, but largely from here, and that's become Thomas House of Hope. And our own Ray is now involved in that in a very important way. So those are some of the things that happened. There was that painful time that we went through when our mother church in Stellenbosch decided that they would become a united church. Now there's a history to this. Way back when many of you may be familiar with the two words John Orr and Stutterfords. Well, now these were two significant department stores on the South African commercial scene. They were started by William Stutterford and John Orr, who met on the boat coming out from England to this country. John Orr was a Presbyterian, William Stutterford was a Congregationalist. And on that boat they made a pact that they would never trade against each other in any place. So they were never in competition there. And that they would influence the churches of which they were part not to compete either. So if you go back from Worcester down to Simonstown, you've got Presbyterian and Congregational congregations leapfrogging each other. In 1978, thereabouts, when the two churches came to an understanding of some kind, built into that understanding was the provision that congregations could merge and become united congregations, or that individual congregations could, Presbyterian or Congregational, could become united churches to accommodate and give substance to the reality that the congregations were mixed. Stellenbosch went that route. Our mother church, some of our elders went over to be at that celebration and came back and said, we've got to go the same route. And we did. But it was traumatic for us because it meant a whole different way of doing things. And some of us found it very difficult to let go of the traditional Presbyterian ways and to take on a more fluid and a tighter form of church government in terms of not so many people, but fewer people doing specific things and delegating. It was a traumatic time for us, but it's worked and it's borne fruit and it has brought us the character that we are today. And now, well, all kinds of new things, and we're faced with a new situation. George came and joined us when Tim left, and now George is on his way, and Bevan has left, and in Hermanus. So exciting things that lie ahead. Intimidating in some ways because the church that many of us knew, the church we grew up in with the traditions and the ways we did things, is going to change. It needs to change. Not dump anything, but be able to put on layers and move out, move into new eras. And we move into areas that are prepared for us by God because He wants His kingdom to be known and to establish itself in a real way in those different places and among those different people, and to transform us in the process. But that's enough from me. It's been a great ministry. It's been a joy. It was a joy for us as a family. It was a joy to be among you. You have ministered to me and my family. We love you greatly. And we've been blessed by staying on here in our, they call them twilight years. God bless. Thank you.